Once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger, has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latest gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Pride, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
What is up, everybody? Just like every other podcast, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. I think I'm a little bit loud. Let me turn myself down a little bit. Hope everybody's had a good weekend. Sorry I didn't come on last night. I was just tired, guys. I had physical therapy yesterday. I've been going back to work, and my hand was just exhausted, and I didn't finish all the reading, and so I took the night off. But I caught up today. We're going to do 2 parts in the Idaho book. This is the James Patterson, the Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. We're going to go back into this book, finish out part 4 and part 6, I believe is what we're looking at. Yeah, or part 4 and part 5. And then we'll finish part 6 probably tomorrow or Tuesday. Just kind of depending on how quickly I get this thing taken care of. Let's see. Let me turn this on. Get the conversation going. Let's put the comments in. So, yeah, thank you guys for supporting me on that. I know there's a lot of other news that have come out here recently. I think the G's have spoken at a couple of different places, talked about some of the injuries that Kaylee had, and that there was potential gagging that was done, and some of the other injuries to Kaylee's head. It's so sad. And I told you guys a couple of days ago that the prosecution was not going to tell them anything. They weren't going to tell them anything until after sentencing, and they've come out and basically said the same. I think that's harsh, in my opinion. The gag order's been lifted now. I would hope that the prosecution there in Latah County has a change of heart on that. And the reason it's important is because Steve wants to be accurate, and Christy, they want to be accurate on their victim statements. And some of the things that they want to be accurate about are the amount of stab wounds, the extent of the injuries, those type of things. And they know some things from the coroner, Kathy Madbett, but outside of that, they really don't know much. And they want to be accurate, and when it comes to Miss Madbett, there's been a couple of different things that have come out, especially we'll look at Ethan's injuries. Dateline says there were carvings. Sounds like she told Ethan's mom that it was a single stab wound to the buttocks. Dateline come out with the legs. We've heard rumors that it was the hamstrings. So it's kind of all over the place. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if she's trying to be, obviously she's trying to be sensitive and be understanding to the emotions of the family members. So I don't know how accurate the information that she's been giving out really is. And so I understand completely. I feel for the families, all of them involved, and their friends, and everybody that was impacted by this. There was a lot of people that lived in that area who were unjustly accused or lived in fear that somebody would come into their door, just like it did in the 1122 King Road residence. So, all right. So we're going to go into part 4. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going into part 4, which is called On the Run. And I found this particular part of the book and these chapters to be so far the most telling about Bryan Kohberger and what was going on in his life during the 6 weeks that he was on the run while he was evading capture, so to speak. And so it starts off on November 13th. The drive west from Moscow to Pullman on Route 270 can just take minutes. It took Kohberger over an hour to make his way back to Pullman. And again, guys, I'm not reading the entire book. I'm not. If you guys want to read the book is out there. There's other people that are reading the book. What I am reading is just the parts that are parts that we speculated, parts that we may have known but couldn't come out and perhaps say 100%, and parts that we had questions about. So I'm not going to read everything, but I'm going to read the cliff notes, so to speak. So it took Bryan Kohberger over an hour to make his way back to Pullman. He stayed home for less than 4 hours. At around 9, he turned around to Moscow. Now, what we also know is during this time, he also phoned his father and his mother and spoke to them for several hours at a time, or several hours with, throughout that time. And so that kind of tells you, all right, he wasn't asleep. He wasn't sleeping at that night. Now, when you take into consideration everything that he did that night by taking the lives of 4 people, that was at 4 a.m. That was, and he wasn't asleep throughout that time. I mean, maybe perhaps he set an alarm and woke himself up at 1 o'clock that morning, but it sounds like he was up the entire night, that entire night, the entire next day, after committing multiple homicides, goes on further drives, talks to his parents, and doesn't get tired, doesn't crash. So kind of interesting there. It says here, Kohberger's phone pinged at the 1122 King Road at between 9:12 and 9:21. It was the last time the cops saw his phone use the Moscow cell network. His cell phone record showed him arriving back in Pullman at 9:32. Just 3 hours or so later, he made a 45-minute trip from Pullman to Clarkston, Washington via U.S. Highway 95, where cameras saw him at Kate's Cup of Joe coffee stand, and then at 12:46 p.m., the Clarkson grocery store, at a Clarkson grocery store, Albertsons, where he purchased unknown items and left at 1:04 p.m. Students of local crimes, and Kohberger most certainly one of those, knew that Clarkson was a good place to throw things into the river. So they're speculating here, just as many have, that this was the location of where Bryan may have disposed some or all of the evidence into the river. Talks about other cases in this book where things have been disposed of in the river and not found. And so given Bryan Kohberger's study, you would expect that that's probably going to be the same here. Let's see. Let's continue. Yes, I'm a huge Steelers fan. In fact, I talk about the Steelers on a podcast called Steel Curtain Network. I will be on there Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central on a show called The Steelers Hangover. That's actually how I got started in podcasting. Thank you. All righty. So they're alluding to at the same time that Bryan Kohberger may have thrown or disposed some of his the weapon and or some of the evidence. And it was kind of like we kind of heard the same thing when it came to Bill Thompson. He kind of said the same thing about the Clarkson, about the Snake River out there in Clarkson and how he was out there. And so good possibility. I think that a lot of people are on the same path there. Kohberger returned to the county road he had been driving the night before. His phone pinged in rural back roads of Johnson, Washington, 2 hours from Lewiston, between 5:32 and 5:36 p.m. Then it vanished from the network for 2.5 hours from 5:36 to 8 p.m. Payne does not account for what happened during these hours. Gary Jenkins said, from what I heard from his activities afterwards, he was pretty sophisticated in knowing how to get rid of DNA and whatever else he needed to do. I don't know if he went to Lewiston, but he certainly did a lot of driving around. I heard that too. I heard that there was some things on his phone that were erasing things, like doing factory resets. Even after he was arrested, it was like they would periodically erase things. I don't know how true it is, just some rumor I had heard. November 14th, Ben Roberts has his mind on the end of term exams, so he barely notices the spot that where Bryan Kohberger usually sits in class in the Wilson Short Hall is empty today. Later, members of the cohort and Ben will think hard about Bryan's absence on that day and what it means. They clocked it because they described they needed to create a paper trail, a record of what Bryan said and did, just in case something unexpected happened. So they already were doing something like this. If you guys remember, I think it was in Dateline's first episode, they talked about the Bryan tally, where they were documenting things that Bryan Kohberger was doing. Now, I I speculated and I believe that what ended up occurring was he had a lot of these females who were complaining about Bryan Kohberger and some of the things he was doing and saying. And, some of the things were easy to see, right? Like his grading of paperwork, the essays that he left on their documents. Other things, not so much. Other things could be he said, she said type of things. Like, for instance, him following somebody to a car, unless somebody saw it or was on camera. That's going to be kind of hard to prove, so to speak, if it's just a he said, she said scenario. And so what I had assumed, and I believe what happened, is that these females and possibly even a few males contacted, maybe John Snyder or whoever, and there was some sort of an investigation done. Now, Ann Taylor talks about this investigation being done and that they cleared Bryan of any wrongdoing. And so what my speculation is that they informed the school about Bryan's behavior, and the school looked into it and said, hey, without documentation, without you writing down specific dates and times and things that he did, there's not much we can do. And that's why they began that Bryan tally. And so I bet once everything kind of comes out of the woodwork, I think that's what we're going to find out. All righty, let's continue this. But they're also, they indicate here, and just in case something unexpected happened, almost as if they kind of were suspecting Bryan Kohberger here and there. I don't think that's the case, because later on they say they were surprised and things of that nature. But I do think that they had already been clocking in what Kohberger was doing. We all felt he was creepy, Ben said, but harmless. Bryan is weird, but he is not evil. Well, I mean, that's what he may be showing out to the world. And I think that's one of the things that this book highlights, is that Bryan Kohberger was a good actor. He, like, for instance, with his conversation with the older gentleman who was working TSA, in their conversations, he was like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I know what you're talking about. And some of those experiences he may not have had. So, he was a master manipulator. Another part of this book earlier that we read indicated that he became, after his arrest with his dad, the quote unquote perfect son, being polite and nice, but inside he was different. And he expressed it on Tapatalk and in his music, that he had a rap song. And in that rap song, he says, "You are evil, but I am the devil." And so although there was not a hint of evil from some of the persons that were close to him, sometimes some of these people can hide it fairly well, especially if they're very well observed of who they are and how they're acting and how their behaviors could be perceived. And it seems like when you read what he was writing on Tapatalk about his feelings and lack thereof, and also his Google searches about psychopaths and sociopaths, I believe those were referencing himself. I think he was very well self-aware and understood what he was doing. And I think he knew, based on probably a lifetime of experience, that of what proper actions could be in certain places. And so that way it was able to assist him in hiding, a wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak. All righty, so let's continue this. But the next day and the day after that, Ben started to see a slight change in Bryan. He became a bit lighter, more animated. Ben ascribes it as to the end of the term coming and the filters coming off. Something about his appearance is a little looser. He's grown stubble. Everyone, women included, start to get high remarks. Bryan stops writing essays on their essays. But when Bryan thinks about it, he realized Bryan doesn't talk much about his plans for the future. Still, Ben assumes he has them. Why wouldn't he? That's an interesting conversation, or interesting aspect. And I wonder if we're going to find out that maybe perhaps there was something more planned. If Bryan Kohberger was indeed infatuated with, for instance, Elliot Rodger and what he was doing, right? Well, what Elliot Rodger did was he had attacked, certain sorority girls, right? But then he had this idea of going on this rampage where he shot innocent people, right? Until he crashed, and then he turned the gun on himself. Now, Howard Bloom had mentioned there was a lab break-in, and that they suspected Bryan Kohberger was in the process, or maybe perhaps planning to build a bomb. And wouldn't that be another mass casualty type of situation, similar to what Elliot Rodgers did, probably with a similar result? I think that would have been one where I don't know. I'm not sure if it's true. I don't know if it's true or not. Howard Bloom hasn't talked much about it since he's broke it on the show. So maybe there's not enough evidence there, but wouldn't that kind of align a little bit with what Elliot Rodgers did? You know what I'm saying, with the extra added mass life taking, so to speak. Do you guys get what I'm saying? I hope it makes sense. Let me know in the comment section if you guys understand. If you don't, I'm sorry. Let's keep going. But he doesn't talk about his future. Maybe perhaps he never planned on having one outside of, the near future. Maybe he did plan this extravagant way out, so to speak. It'd be interesting to know. November 17th. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So this is Bryan Kohberger after the murders. The receptionist at the medical center is glad so some of the WSU kids have skipped town early for Thanksgiving. The murders over in Moscow have freaked everyone out. The receptionist at the medical center is glad when she sees one of them at least keeps his scheduled appointment. The kid's name is Bryan Kohberger. He comes in at the north end. Sorry about that. He comes in a North Face jacket, tall, thin, pale, eyes that bug out. He's taller, goes out of his way to chat to all the staff. It charms them. He stands out. The receptionist doesn't usually remember anyone's name, but she'll remember Bryan's. Her boss doesn't usually comment on any of the patients, but even she says he's so nice and charming. So this is really short after the murders have occurred. And this guy's like on cloud nine at this point. You look at that photograph that he took, the selfie, and in that selfie, he seems relieved. He seems pleasured with himself. There's a smile on his face. That's not a mask smile. That's to himself. And this is him being in that happy, cheery mood still just 3 days later. Before he leaves, Bryan schedules an appointment for next spring. See you then, she tells him. So he was planning on staying, obviously, there at this time. At this time, there was the plan. November 18th. So what do you think about the murders in Moscow? Peggy at the State Department of Licensing in Pullman is making small talk with the tall, thin WSU student at the front of the line who has come to exchange his Pennsylvania plate for 2 Washington plates of his white Hyundai Elantra. Goes on to say, horrific, isn't it? He replies, and this is Bryan Kohberger. She later states that there was nothing out of the ordinary in their conversation. But so she asked him, what do you think about the Moscow murders? And he goes, horrific, isn't it? He's happy to chat, as she is. That's what it indicates here. The guy says he's shocked, as they are. Nervous, too, that the murderer is out on the loose. He wants to know what she thinks. Who would have done that? Is the murderer among them? What about the cops said? So let's put this into perspective. So the lady goes, you heard about the murders in Moscow over, in Moscow. It's horrific, isn't it? I'm shocked. I'm scared just as much as everybody else. And mainly because this killer is out on the loose. Who could have done this? This is a game to him. He's getting off on asking her this question and her going and talking about it. This kind of tells me maybe perhaps he is Papa Roger. Look at the questions he asks. Who would have done that? Is the murderer among them? What does she think? These questions here are very similar to what Papa Roger was asking. Obviously, everybody was asking these questions, but if Bryan Kohberger was infiltrating into into Facebook messengers, then you would think that if he's asking these people in real life, trying to talk about the murders, he's getting off on it. Wouldn't you think he's doing the same thing online? So I'm starting to really start to think maybe perhaps he is him. Peggy doesn't think twice about it, but then after his arrest, she sees his face on TV and it hits her. The guy she had the perfectly normal chat with about the murder was changing his plates, try to get away with it. December 2nd at 1:45 p.m., Rose Perez at a local hairstylist sees that one of her regulars, Brian, is coming in for his usual skin fade, 35-minute hair appointment. No big deal, she thinks. Brian has always been nice, polite. He started coming into her in July. I wonder what day in July. But he started coming to her in July. Since then, he's popped in every few weeks and become one of her regulars. So today he shows up and as she clips using scissors and the blade, they talk away. She learns that he's heading home for Pennsylvania for Christmas soon, but he plans to be back in January. It's a routine visit on a routine day. It's crazy to find out I interacted with this person, she later said. I touched this person's hair. I made this person look and feel good about themselves. So as you can see, the plan was for Bryan Kohberger to always have gone out to Pennsylvania for Christmas. And I never doubted that. When I said that Bryan Kohberger's parents changed their plans, I still think that that's the truth. That's obviously the truth. We looked at his flight logs. He had purchased the plane ticket December 10th and flew out December 11th. Supposed to have arrived there December 11th. However, because of weathery conditions, they didn't leave out until December, or Michael Kohberger didn't leave out of Seattle until December 12th, but he flew into Spokane. Now, I think the plan was, because there's no exchange of a ticket, right? Now, when you look at the flight logs for Michael Kohberger and you see, because there was a canceled flight from Seattle to Pullman Airport, and then there was a change from Seattle to Spokane. It says there the original ticket number and a bunch of other things because it had to be changed. That's not there for the first one. So I believe the initial plan was for Bryan Kohberger to fly out to Pennsylvania. And I think he talked his dad into going and picking him up and him changing his plan. And the book kind of lays out the timeline. And so it's kind of easy to depict what it is that Bryan Kohberger said to his dad to have gotten him to go out there. So let's continue this. We'll get there when we get there, though. Let's see. Pullman police have no idea that their suspect is in their midst or what he looks like, or in fact anything, because for once in an unprecedented fashion, Moscow hasn't been looping them in or sharing any details. That makes them unhappy. Glenn Johnson, the Pullman mayor at the time, later reflected, everyone is so frustrated. Where's the information they're keeping? A secret. Now, they say they're doing this just because they don't want any leaks and that. And I think that's BS, to be 110% honest with you. I think these guys thought there was a possibility this could have been a cop. I think they thought when they were going through the evidence and how little evidence that there was there, that this person had an understanding of investigations, had an understanding of how things worked. And I think that, and they would have been somewhat correct, that this person had some pre-hand knowledge of law enforcement techniques, law enforcement investigative techniques. And, they were able to basically get away outside of the one thing that he left behind, which was the K-bar knife sheath. And so I think that might be a big possibility why they decided to keep some information away. You know what I mean? That's just my opinion. I don't know that for a fact, but I think that's partial of the reason why they didn't open up to Pullman. Because if they thought it was somebody that they could have found, why not open up the information to nearby? They must have had some indication or felt that this person maybe had law enforcement. So let's continue this. When WSU Police Chief Gary Jenkins considered how Brian resumed his normal activities in Pullman in the days and weeks following the murders, he believed his actions denoted a growing confidence. I would think with every day that went by that he wasn't caught, with his chances were getting better and better that he wouldn't be, Jenkins said. And I agree. So basically what he's saying is that because Bryan Kohberger wasn't getting caught, he was getting more confident because they hadn't knocked on his door or anything. He probably thought he got away with it completely. And so, and his actions are probably of that, the cheeriness and all that other stuff. Like he probably thought he got away with it. December 2022, It's one of the big one. It's one of the last classes of the semester, criminal justice processes and institutions, a course taught by Dr. Craig Hemmons in the Wilson Short Hall. The topic of the recent murders in Moscow is brought up for class discussion. I need to look up where the Wilson Short Hall is. I wonder if that's near Nevada Street. Remember, that's where he drove. At the end of the show, I'll pull up Google Earth and we'll look that up. All righty. So let's see. So this one's interesting, right? So this is in December, but it doesn't say when in December. So they're in class and the topic of the murders come up. For instance, and this is the conversation they have. What is legally on the table for the murderer when they've caught him? Idaho has a death penalty. Washington State does not. Murder surely would have known this. Ordinarily, Bryan would have been front and center speaking more than most of the others. But one of Bryan's classmates, someone who has 4 classes with him that semester and is used to listening to his monologues, noticed that he doesn't speak at all. Not once in 3 hours. He's got nothing to say on the topic that has the class revved up. Now, I wonder if this conversation happened on December 7th or later. Because that's when the bolo comes out and that's when the white Elantra comes out. And I'm sure that's going to have some sort of reaction on him. He ended up getting out of town, finding a way to get out of town and getting that car out of town as fast as possible after that. So I don't know, maybe that has something to do with it. Or maybe perhaps he's finding out or he's realizing and he's like, oh, snap, that Idaho has the death penalty. Maybe he didn't know that. Maybe that caught him off guard because that seemed to be the source of the conversation. What's going to happen to this guy once he gets caught? Maybe he got scared. I don't know. It seems like he got scared and pled out before the trial. So maybe he is afraid to die. Let's see. The classmate assumes Kohberger is ill, tired, or something. Ben Roberts, another classmate, remembers dimly that Bryan said he was extra short on sleep in December. So next chapter, December 9th. So this is December 9th. It doesn't say what day. So I wonder if this was December 7th. It could have been December 7th when they had this. And the reason why he wasn't so communicative is because, well, maybe some of his classmates know he drives a white Elantra. You know what I'm saying? December 9th, Bryan is blowing up again at Professor Snyder. Now, this is 2 days after the bolo, after the white Elantra comes out. So he is under a lot of pressure. And I think that's why he's a lot different now on December 9th than he was November 17th, November 18th, when he's having all these interactions with people. He's acting charming. He's being nice. He's being talkative. He's thinking he's gotten away with it. Now there's another mistake that's being made. Somehow they've been able to figure out not just the make and model. They may have had the year wrong at that time, but the differences between that year and a 2015 model like his is very, very difficult to tell, especially through a camera like the cameras that they had, the security cameras. But they were also able to tell that it was white Elantra and put that out there. He might be getting really, really nervous. He might be on edge because he knows he's getting caught. And this is around the time also that Papa Rogers is kind of losing it a little bit when he's online and stuff. So it's quite possible. I might be convincing myself that Papa Rogers and BK might be the same guy. But December 9th, Bryan is blowing up again at Professor Snyder. This is also the day before Michael Kohberger goes and buys that plane ticket. Only 2 days ago, it seemed as though Bryan might have eked out a Hail Mary. And that was December 7th. And so up until that point, they said, all right, we've seen some improvement. He says the plan that I told him to be more respectful to women and professors and his peers and his students, while not perfect, we agreed there was progress. And then it goes, and yet the committee still decided it had not to terminate him. This was just on December 7th. They decided, hey, you've done enough. We're not going to terminate you. 2 days later, he's blowing up, probably because his car is all over the place. People are looking for white Elantras. Now, 2 days because now, just 2 days after the promising meeting, Bryan is losing it for the second time this semester with Snyder in the professor's office. When Ben and Bryan's cohorts hear about this, they are mystified about how anyone could rub the affable, easygoing professor the wrong way. That's crazy. I mean, everybody liked him, right? Bryan cannot control himself in front of Snyder, apparently. The rest of the class have seen what happens when happens to Bryan when he's angry. He goes bright red and clenches his fist so hard that his knuckles turn white. That's interesting. Chief Jenkins heard one of the thorny issues is under the discussion is the allegation of a woman student that Bryan followed her to her car. But the discussion spins out of control, way beyond civility, into something angry. 2 days later, on December 11th, Dr. Nweli wrote to Bryan requesting a meeting at which he must have known she would fire him and he would lose his funding. So that meeting had already occurred. I think it's just gotten a little things inaccurate. Nobody's perfect, right? That information came out on the 9th, and that what meeting that they're talking about is from then, because they had met together for that meeting. And by December 12th, Bryan Kohberger was out of there. And I believe on the 9th, he was told not to come back. And so he was sent home and didn't go back. And so he talks to his dad on the 10th, probably tells him, hey, this is what's going on. And, they're kicking me out and I'm losing it. I want to go home already. And can you just come get me? And so dad probably buys a plane ticket and flies across country to go get baby boy. And I don't know if he knows, maybe he does. He's suspicious. I hear he's suspicious about things. I hear his family is suspicious and at least telling him some stuff. But he goes across country and gets that car out of there with his son, right after the bolo comes out. So December 12th, Diola Adejundi, a WSU criminal justice undergrad, is puzzled when she looks at her end of semester grade. She sees Professor Snyder's TA, Bryan, had posted that she got a B. He's wrong, she thinks, and he added up her scores wrong. She deserves an A, so she emails him and tells him he needs to fix it. She's never had a one-on-one interaction with Bryan before. She's seen him in Professor Snyder's class 3 or 4 times, but not recently. It seems that he has stopped coming to class. This was December 12th, like I said. He got in that argument on the 9th, and so he stopped going to class after that. At 10:58 p.m., Bryan emails Diola back and says, I have adjusted the settings to only account to your 10 highest scores. This should have a positive impact. Let me know if you have any questions. So he still had access into getting into the WSU stuff. So he wasn't technically fired at that time. That didn't come until December 19th. And I'm assuming that's when all of his login stuff probably was deactivated. Good, she thinks that's taken care of, and she doesn't think about Bryan Kohberger anymore until she sees his mugshot a few weeks later, and she thinks that this guy committed the murder and is both interesting and bothered to answer her email about her grade. That is weird. And he was also, driving. So this is 11 o'clock, right? 11 o'clock or 10:58 p.m. But on December 12th, he's picking up his dad around this time. He just probably got home. No, because dad arrived at 9:34. 9:35. That's what the plane, unless there's some sort of delay, but he would have arrived in Spokane about 9:35. Now, I don't know how much luggage and things of that nature that he had, if any. He may have been just a carry-on guy. And so let's just assume that's the case. So he's probably at Bryan's car, going, getting deboarding, getting through the airport. And Spokane airport's a little bit bigger than the Pullman one, so he's got to go through all that, get outside. It's probably close to 9:45. It's about a 2-hour drive from Spokane to Pullman, and this was at night. They had canceled the flight to Pullman for a reason because of the weather, and so they're going into some icy conditions and things of that nature. So 10:58, 11 p.m. he responds. I wonder if that's when he got home, because that would have been 2.5 hours later. So he would have just gotten home. And my assumption is that he was in his Pullman apartment. I know there's been some debate whether or not he went from Spokane Airport all the way across, never went back home. But I would assume, because he's answering grades at 11 o'clock at night, that he did make it to his apartment and he went home. Indiana, December 15, 2022 at 10:45 on the third day of the 4-day cross-country trek east of Pullman, Washington to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Father and son hear sirens on I-70 outside Indianapolis, and then it talks about the traffic stop. Then it goes and says 10 minutes later, it's pulled over again for the same thing. And nothing much there about, just kind of talks about those stops, but then it goes into the speculation behind it. So it says here, for weeks, months, and years, in fact, after Kohberger is arrested, it's reported that the Indiana stops were not random. It's reported that the FBI already had Kohberger in their sights, that the FBI had a single-engine plane tracking him, and that the FBI, give me a second, the FBI had a single-engine plane tracking him, and that the FBI hadn't looped in Moscow to what they knew. Many articles mention this, and Chief James Fry gets irritated every time he reads one because it's not only off base, it's completely nuts. He's pissed that the only leak in the entire investigation came not from any of the people who worked directly with him, but he believes the Pennsylvania branch of the FBI. I'd said that if there was any leaks, there was probably a Fed and outside of the state of Idaho. I also said I have some connections to people in Pennsylvania. Notice that. All righty. So let's continue. Tell me this. If they can't keep their mouth shut that they're getting ready to arrest a person, do you think they can keep their mouth shut about a plane tracking the killer all the way across the United States? He asked sarcastically. Now, he says that that this is all not true. He says, it makes a great story. It is also completely untrue. He goes on to say, if it was truly would have happened and I would have found out about it, you probably would have seen the roof of the police department come off. As far as Fry knows, and the spokesperson for the FBI has usually stated on the record, the stop in Indiana were random. I've been saying that wasn't anything to do with Bryan with I never thought that was the FBI or that those officers had any idea that the reasons why they were stopping him had to do with his suspicion of him being a murderer. The reason behind that is the behavior of the officers. If you guys go back and watch my videos on those stops, I say these guys had no idea this was a triple homicide murder, because in the end of the day, when you pull somebody over like that, Bryan Kohberger doesn't know why you're pulling him over. He could have very well thought, all right, this is it. They got me. They've got me, right? And he could be this guy that's just crazy and isn't going to jail. And so you don't know how he's going to react to you walking up there. So hanging in with your hands inside of the car, just chilling there and talking to the guy, if he pulled out a weapon or did anything, you're in a really bad spot. Not just for one officer, but two officers to act in a very similar manner. Told me they had no idea. It's an officer safety concern. It's an officer safety issue. And so, in fact, it's still an officer safety issue, regardless of who the person is. If I was their supervisor, I probably would have told them, hey, you can't be putting your hands in there. If something happens, look where your hands are. How are you going to, you now have to get up, get out, and then reach back for your weapon to protect yourself. That's not an appropriate officer safety stance. If you have concerns, you can't hear them, pull them out of the car. Pull them out of the car where you can see them. But don't lean in the way they did. So I just strongly suspect that they had no idea. It goes on to say the timeline of the investigation indicates that law enforcement had not yet honed in on Kohberger on December 15th. Brett Payne hadn't even heard the name Bryan Kohberger until the FBI phoned him on December 19th. Now, according to Howard Bloom, he says that the FBI and his FBI source, they got word a little bit earlier. Now, I can see why. Let's put this into perspective, right? So if the FBI goes in there and they do their IGG stuff and they come up with a name, and the name is Bryan Kohberger and he lives in Moscow, Idaho, there's no problems there. I'm sure that they give the name right over, but that's not the case. It comes back to Bryan Kohberger, who resides in Pullman, Washington. There's a state line thing. There's crossing state lines. And so they probably had to say, all right, hey, is this a case that Moscow is going to be able to prosecute because of the jurisdiction aspect of maybe perhaps some of this crime being planned, being some of the stalking, some of those things may have been done from Washington, and that he may have had to have obviously crossed state lines to commit this crime. So maybe perhaps that's one of the reasons why they hold off on giving the name to Moscow. I would assume that would probably be accurate. I don't think they had a plane or any of those type of things that are flying across town or across the country. As he said, that there was some information that did get out. He suspects it was a Pennsylvania FBI agent. So he would have expected that if they were chasing somebody, that also, some of the other things would have also come out. So interesting stuff, here. But I don't think the officers had any idea. I do think maybe perhaps the FBI did. Now, how did they know if maybe perhaps it wasn't because of the IGG? Maybe perhaps because of an FBI tip. Now, we know that Howard Bloom wrote in an Airmail article that there was information that was given in grand jury about a tip basically that was made, and that they being the Goncalves family almost made contact with whatever the source, I guess, of the information of the tip. And they were stopped by the FBI and stopped because the tip came through the FBI tip line. Now, I've never asked Steve about that. It's kind of probably the same reason why Ann Taylor never asked Bryan Kohberger about his real alibi. I probably don't want to know the answer to that question. If he did make contact with somebody that spoke with a grand juror that gave him information, I think that's the way Howard Bloom wrote it, that the Goncalves family made contact with a grand juror, somebody on the grand jury who told them about the tip, so to speak, and they were going to reach out to the tip, and they were stopped by the FBI. Now, JLR, Jonathan Lee Riches Investigates, had posted out on Twitter or X several times that Bryan Kohberger's sister, Melissa Kohberger, had filed a tip through the FBI tip line. No idea how true that is. I've heard about it. I've heard that those rumors are true, but I obviously cannot validate them. I'm not with the FBI and I don't see the tips, but I've heard about it. I heard the nickname that was used and those type of things, and the sources that I have, I tend to believe, but I can't say for a 100% fact that I've seen those things. It goes on to say that the Kohbergers arrived in Pennsylvania on December 16th. December 28, 2022, Bryan gets in his car. He has cleaned every inch of it inside and out and drives to the end of the Monroe County and back. He doesn't know it, but he's got eyes on him every second. The car and his phone are being tracked. There's a team in Pennsylvania, state troopers, in the woods surrounding the 119 Lamb's Den Drive, surveilling it around the clock. I wonder why he's driving to the end of the county and back. If I had to take a guess, he's probably doing something illegal. Getting out of the house, going to a location, probably something you don't want his parents to know about. And if he's always wearing long sleeves to hide things, you guys can kind of probably figure what I'm trying to get to, what he's probably trying to do out there. They have seen him disposing garbage in his neighbor's bins. So let's see. Gotta check something real quick, guys. All right. Sorry about that. All right. December 29th, when FBI agents stormed the Kohberger home, blowing down the door and the windows out, raiding it, Kohberger's car. They have warrants for anything and everything that could connect them to the murders at 1122. And they talk about the stuff that they collected, right? From his vehicle, the swabs, the Ziploc bags with pink zipper, 7 quarters, etc. Right? It says more tantalizing on Leary's list are items that are not fully explained, but that could suggest possible motive for the murder. For instance, there's a list of intriguingly mentions a book, doesn't give the title, with the underlinings of page 118. Then there's the item on Leary's list of a drawing referred to a man's mind. Could this reference to a well-known black and white poster of a man's face in a profile with a naked woman, erotically arched backward, cleverly drawn into the frontal lobe, the name Sigmund Freud scribbled underneath? Other miscellaneous items are harder for the online community to analyze. These include a note to Dad from Bryan, a note in his desk, and a note from Bryan to Montana, a criminal psychology book, other criminology books, a maroon notebook, documents, and the DeSales handbook. Now, this is a note from Bryan to Montana. I thought it was there was somebody named Montana on the WSU. It was her last name, Ashley, maybe Montana. There was a female whose last name was Montana. I wonder if that's who the note was to. Then I think this is where, because remember around the time where I guess Bryan Kohberger was pleading out, there was this rumor that there was an animal strand, right? And that it ended up being connected to Murphy. Well, this goes on to say with one of the, when they talked about the list there in Bryan Kohberger's apartment, when this list is published, it isn't just the internet forums that focus on the possible animal hair strain, along with the blood stains and human hair as being a vital importance. She loved to sleep with Murphy. So the question I want answered is, who put Murphy in a separate bedroom that night? If it was Bryan Kohberger, well, Steve thinks that that could have been a costly mistake. I don't think that was the case. I think that they found out that it was Kaylee had Murphy in her room. I mean, she got home late. Murphy was probably already asleep in her bed, when she got home. Chapter 99, December 30th. They told him in the Monroe County Correction Facility in Stroudsburg, and they hold him there, and they talked to him for nearly 15 minutes. Bryan Kohberger is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. They swabbed him for DNA several times. Presumably, the samples are in a lab being analyzed right now. Bryan knows no more than about what law enforcement has on him. At first, Bryan says he doesn't need a lawyer. He is calm. When he is asked if he knows what murders they're talking about, he says, "Of course, yes, certainly, I'm aware of what's going on. I'm 10 miles away from this." And then suddenly he changes his mind and asks for a lawyer. That's interesting, right? Because they're like, "Hey, we have you here under suspicion of murder. Do you know what murder we're talking about? Or you know what murders we're talking about?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course I know." And then he hushes up. I think he realizes he made a mistake, because if he had not committed a murder, I mean, maybe he would have assumed that they were talking about the Moscow murders, but had he not committed murder, I mean, if somebody accuses you, and again, this is like 6 weeks later, he's now in Pennsylvania, why is he automatically assuming, or 7 weeks later, why all of a sudden is he assuming the murders that happened almost 2 months earlier are the ones that they're referring to? And in Moscow, where, if he's arrested in Pennsylvania, maybe they did tell him more. Maybe they told him more. Maybe you go, "Hey, are you familiar with the Moscow murders?" Yeah, of course. But if they didn't, and the way it sounds like here in the book, he kind of opened up that can of worms by saying, "Yeah, I know which murders. I'm 10 miles away from this." It's kind of like, man, I was watching this confession of this one other serial killer, and they were talking about the body they found, and he's like, "It's not me, and he's like, "I know you found that one and the one next to him," and they hadn't even brought it up, and he started talking about 2 other people and this and a third, and boom, they end up finding him. It's kind of like that, like he's like opening the book, opening it up before, like that's kind of what I'm seeing here. All right, then it goes, suddenly he changes his mind. He asks for a lawyer. While he waits, he's given a dark green blanket-like suicide prevention vest to wear. On the morning of December 30th, Jason Labar, the chief public defender from Monroe County, comes in to see Bryan. Labar finds that his new client is calm in all of the 4 meetings over the next 3 days, unusually calm given the circumstances. Bryan tells the lawyer that he was shocked when the agents burst into his parents' home waving guns in his face. Kohberger seems to want to chat as if he's got a story he wants to tell. What story would you want to tell? I mean, if you didn't commit the crime, what story would you have to tell? There's no story to tell. Like, "Hey, I don't know why they're charging me. I don't understand." But to have a story to tell tells me that he was wanting to try to see if he can convince him that it wasn't him. But the lawyer cuts him off. "I really wanted to make sure that Kohberger understood that I didn't want to know about the facts of the circumstances. LeBar is almost surprised at how quickly Bryan agrees to waive his rights in Pennsylvania to be extradited. He was very candid with me about the extradition, LeBar said, which made his job easier. His client wants to understand what the police think they know. So he was open about that. He wants to know what the police think they know. And he didn't want to wait. He wanted to get over there as fast as possible. See what mistakes he made. See how they caught him. I want to say thank you to Anna for being the newest member, Florence for $4.99 super sticker, and Cyborg Mama being a member for 2 months. Thank you guys. You guys rock. All righty. We are now in chapter 100. January 3rd, 2023, dressed in a red jumpsuit, Bryan walks into the Monroe County Court of Common Pleas in Stroudsburg for the extradition hearing. He looks 3 times at his family. The person he gazes at directly is his father, Michael. Bryan even smiles faintly as Judge Patty Worthington questions him as to whether he's fully understood that he's waiving his rights in Pennsylvania and will be flown to Idaho to face 4 charges of murder. Bryan Kohberger collapses. A court official rushes over to provide Kleenex. Miss Kohberger's eyes are so swollen from crying that she can barely see as the proceedings finish. 2 nights ago, the family released a statement that they had worked on with LeBar. And in this statement is when they basically say that they're going to be quiet and things of that nature. But they also say we have fully cooperated with law enforcement agencies. That is in their statement. That is in this book as well. And so I had often said that, hey, I think they talked about Bryan and talked about some of the things that they knew. All righty, January 4th. The single prop plane makes 2 refueling stops first at Willard Airport in St. Louis, then in Rapid City, South Dakota, on his journey from Pennsylvania to Pullman. As far as law enforcement know, it's Kohberger's first time back in Moscow since the brief visit to the King Road house 4 hours after the alleged committed murders. Now, this book was written before his plea, so we don't have to say alleged. After he committed the murders. But the book was written beforehand, and so that's why it says alleged. And that's part 4, guys. We're going to go into part 5. Let's see. Do you think he was going on drugs when he was in Pullman, or maybe never stopped? I don't know if he ever stopped, to be honest with you. 100%. I don't think he ever did. Part 5, the blame game. And this one's also relatively a shorter one, although this one took me an hour to get to part 4. I didn't expect that. But we'll go through part 5. This is in Priest Lake, Idaho. This is where the Chapins are. December 29th. It's late. After 10:30 p.m. and the Chapins are headed to bed. Stacy is showering when Jim hears her phone ring. He knows that something big must have happened for Tyson Barrett to be calling so late. Stacy comes out and hears from Barrett that they have just arrested a guy named Bryan Kohberger. She and Jim go to Hunter and Macy's bedrooms and tell them the news. That night is the first time in weeks Jim Chapin sleeps well. They all do. The police have arrested someone. It comes from a huge relief. They have no idea what his connection to Ethan is. They are not interested in finding out. But when Jim sees Kohberger's face on the news, weirdly, it resonates. He just looked like a bad guy. A long, drawn face. He just fit the picture that I had in my mind, he said later. Stacy will shoot me for saying this, but there's 3 ways you can look at it. He's either going to go to jail for life, or he is going to be put to death, or he's going to go walk out that front door. I'm okay with any one of them because the outcome for him is going to be the same. What he means is that Kohberger is not likely to survive even if he gets off. This is Idaho after all. You really think Steve Goncalves, Jim asked months later with a weary smile, is going to sit back while he walks around freely? The answer is no. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I would have feared that as well. I would have feared something like that would have happened had Bryan Kohberger walked freely. December 29th. Again, December 29th. There's relief from the Goncalves family, too. Of course, Tyson Barrett tells them the news. Tomorrow is a joint memorial for Kaylee and Maddie. Now the family can focus on the service without the fear the murderer is watching. WC hasn't published any of the disciplinary problems the school faced with Kohberger. Steve Goncalves isn't going to stop with his own investigation just because they've got him in custody. Hall, I think they meant hell, all of the stuff that I found and dug up on him, this S hasn't come out. It pisses me off. They're really clammed up. So there's been a lot of stuff that they've been able to dig up on Bryan Kohberger that's not been out. And I think we're going to find out more of those things, especially as this gag order is lifted. December 30th. And so this is the other thing too. So remember, this is December 29th. Now they told the Chapins around 10:30. So this would have been 11:30, 12:30, 1:30 in the morning, Pennsylvania time. So this would have been about 30 minutes after Bryan Kohberger got arrested. This is the same time that they told the Goncalves family. Goncalves family went and looked him up as soon as they got told. And they found his social media. And they found that his social media was following some of the victims, Xana, Maddie, and Kaylee. Take that for what it is. I don't know how accurate it is. I know a lot of people question whether or not the shadow dragon that Andrew Garrett was able to find and discover that showed some of the Bryan Kohberger's profiles with the same emails that were associated with him once they ran a clear background. Clear background is what you do when you go for like the pre-TSA stuff. They have that clear thing you guys seen in the airport. It's the same thing. They have access to that. And so they ran Bryan Kohberger's background through there and got his email addresses that he's associated with things like credit reports and credit applications and things like that. And they were able to cross-reference those with social media and pull up the actual accounts that were associated with them. And it ended up being a few that were like associated with his DeSales University email, his WSU email, and one of his other private ones. And on a couple of those, there was that the Goncalves family found there was a Bryan Kohberger Instagram page that was also linked to one of his emails that was following the girls. And on that Instagram, there were some Kohberger family members following him. And so I know a lot of people speculate maybe it was a fake profile. I just find it weird that on the day Bryan Kohberger is arrested, that his family members are looking him up on Instagram saying, oh, we don't find him, and here he is, let's add him. And that those people are adding him back. I'm not sure if that's how it went down. I think a lot of his family members probably were unfollowing him, trying to get away from him so that they wouldn't be contacted publicly, or because people were. I mean, I think there was one creator who was going through all of Bryan Kohberger's Instagram followers and people that he followed and were following him, and reached out to them and say, hey, how do you feel about Bryan Kohberger following you and stuff like that? So those things were prevalent then. So December 30th, journalist Evan Ellis is on live on that Friday when he gets a text message from Chief Fry holding a press conference at 1. Ellis is still on the air when the news breaks in Pennsylvania. It's a leak. Agents have had arrested Bryan Kohberger, a WSU criminology PhD student. Oh, Ellis thinks, experiencing a rare feeling of shock. The murderer had been walking among them. Ellis has phoned a source in law enforcement and asked where in the area he might bump into an out-of-state authorities executing a search warrant. The source tells him, I'd go to the Steptoe Village Apartments. Ellis arrives just as the raid is getting to start and records this for his Facebook page. Based on his experience, he fears that the administration at WSU is alma mater. I can't pronounce that word, guys. I know how to say it. I can't pronounce it. It's tongue twisted right now. We'll go into communication lockdown. My wife works there. She shows some of the crap that WSU sends out internally, which is do not say anything, do not talk to anybody. This is not happening. You're not talking. And of course, they can't prevent people from doing it, but they're extremely vindictive up there, and everybody is scared. And, you know, I talked about the 2-sentence message that WSU sent out when Bryan Kohberger pled. Not even an apology, not anything, just kind of like, oh, we heard about it. That's basically what they said. Well, apparently they've had some issues. I fight with WSU on a weekly basis, he said, about hiding information and shutting out the taxpayers. It's completely disgusting and sad. but WSU has been doing it for years. Today is no different. In fact, it is worse. Ellis thinks so. There's a WSU comes out with a statement, and Ellis responds to it saying it's not good enough. Where's the transparency, the accountability for hiring Kohberger? Any apology? None of those things were present in WSU's statement then nor later. And it goes on to say he posts a Facebook video that afternoon in which repeats Wheeler's name 3 times for effect. We've reached out to multiple times to WSU spokesman Phil Weiler for more information on Kohberger as a WSU student. Weiler has failed to return any emails, texts, and phone calls in regard to this arrest of his WSU student, doctoral student in criminology, and more. And any more information at WSU on the suspect has been denied at this point, with no response from Mr. Weiler, the spokesman at WSU. In fact, Washington State University administration is in total meltdown. So this is the next chapter, and it talks about what's going on at WSU. Inside the Wilson Short Hall, phones are ringing off the hook with news of Kohberger's arrest spreads like wildfire. Professor Snyder is bombarded with calls. So too is Professor Willits. Willits is distraught. He is who admitted Kohberger. A day or so later, he runs into WSU Chief Police Gary Jenkins in the corridor, and Willits almost collapsed. He was about ready to break down, Jenkins said. He said, I just feel horrible. I'm the one who accepted him into the program, so he felt responsible. As Evan Ellis predicted, the administrative mandate, don't give interviews, come down very quickly from high to the faculty and to the students in the Department of the Criminal Justice. The message in the email that Ben Roberts and other members of Kohberger's cohorts received from WSU administration. They're basically told, don't say anything, like shut up, be quiet. This is not just to the faculty. This is also to the students. This is a clear, like, hey, all we care about is money. That's all they care about. The students immediately reached out to one another, torn between the shock and disbelief. As advanced students in criminal minds, how had they missed it? I can think a group of people who had been in a better position to see this sort of behavior, the red flags associated in their own ranks, Ben said, and we just completely didn't see it. December 30th, Lexi Paddington, daughter of a local lawyer, Mike Pattison, is pissed. She's on TikTok on her phone watching all these videos that WSU students are making about Bryan Kohberger. She can see on TikTok that Kohberger's former students are talking about all the red flags, his harsh grading of women, his rude remarks to women in class, his aggression, his stalking of someone, his social difficulties. So where's the statement from WSU about the school's role in this? He was their hire, a teacher, a TA, Lexi said after learning about Kohberger's past disciplinary problems. They hadn't even addressed that aspect. And I think that's disgusting and reflects on a lot of the community. I know my mom and people were pissed. Her mom will wind up leaving. The only silver lining is that at the very, very thin one is that Kohberger's arrest removes a question mark Lexi had about a possible role of somebody she went to high school with, Emma Bailey. When a vandal alert went out on the unconscious person and Lexi heard about the murders, she was worried that drugs and Emma were involved. When she learned it was a knife attack and that drugs were not involved, she stopped suspecting Emma. But in her mind, WSU is primarily to blame. Wouldn't be surprised. And so Moscow's mayor, Art Buttigieg, he was in Montana, and he is spending the holiday in his off-the-grid cabin northwest of Montana. There's an unexpected knock on the door. One of his neighbors, she tells him there's been an arrest in the case. He contacts city council and gets a sneak peek at the arrest and extradition documents. So the mayor got to see some things, maybe that he shouldn't have, but he's the mayor. He's the mayor. So out of Mexico, this is where Emily and Hunter are. Emily comes down to the kitchen in her pajamas. Hunter Johnson and her parents are already sitting there talking. They found him, her mother says, and she hands Emily her phone Emily looks at the photo. She's never met this guy. She and Hunter feel certain that neither had Xana or Ethan. Josie and Lyndon check in, and turns out they never met him either. It's mystifying. Josie immediately searches for Bryan Kohberger on Instagram, but she's too late. If he had a real footprint there, it's gone. But there's a plethora of fake accounts. She even gets a DM from one of them saying, "Hey, it's Bryan. Sorry for killing your friends." That's BS, guys. That's total BS. And that's probably somebody who ended up being a pro-burger, because that's what the pro-burgers are. That's who they are. That's exactly who they are. They're ugly people that attack family members, friends, victims. They have no care in the world who they attack or target or say negative things about, and feel like, oh, nothing should be said negative about Bryan or whatever the case may be. They call him Bri or whatever they call him. And they're so stupid. They don't even see that the things that they do. It's ridiculous. On December 30th, Josh Ferraro is on edge waiting for the news. And this is the guy that went to school with Bryan Kohberger at DeSales University. And he didn't recognize him or didn't remember him. And then he kind of went through his emails and like, oh, crap, that's him. That's the ghost. Because that's what they called him earlier in the book. The guy who didn't speak to anyone except the professors. And this is the other thing, too. So he goes, the guy that didn't speak to anyone except the professors, who occasionally hung back to talk to Professor Ramsland and Bolger. Now, Bolger said that all of her interactions with Bryan Kohberger were online and she never met him in person. So I don't understand where he's saying that he hung back after class to go hang out with her. I don't know. He does say when Josh last saw the suspect's face, it was fuller and different. So he lost some weight and things of that nature. All right, this goes on to Center Valley, Pennsylvania. DeSales University Professor Catherine Ramsland is deeply frustrated. As soon as the news breaks, the suspect is arrested for the murders in Idaho of the Idaho 4, was once a student of DeSales. The university issues an edict to the faculty. No one who taught Bryan Kohberger is to say anything. And that was one of the things that Steve had mentioned, that she couldn't say anything because he was a student and things of that nature, and she was told not to because of her school. According to the book, that seems to be accurate. She's not allowed to write or talk about She's not allowed to write or talk about the one murder case that she has personal knowledge of and for which she may or may not have called to testify. She reads recollections of Kohberger as one of her better students, someone who eventually wanted to impress Ramsland by reading her books, including her most well-known Confessions of a Serial Killer about Dennis Rader and the BTK Killer. That's the one that I think has page 118 underlined. I've been saying that for a while. That's the one book that we know he had. And I've been saying that's the book I knew he had. It is the book he had. Now, he may have had other books, obviously, and it may not be the one that has page 118 underlined, but I wondered if it was. In articles discussing her class, including her course on spree murders like Elliot Rodger, her student tells the media they remember Kohberger dedicating himself to the assignments, in particular to Rodger's YouTube video, which was on the syllabus. Chad Petprin, another student of Ramsland, said that he remembered Kohberger as a normal guy. Bryan sometimes mentioned going to church and Bible study, but when Chad asked him questions about the Bible, Bryan didn't always know the answer. It's kind of just like, again, putting on this mask, this facade, this fakeness of who he is. December 30 in Sailorsburg, Pennsylvania. That little prick, he was in my house all the damn time. When Mark Bayless sees Kohberger's image on TV, he swears suddenly it all makes sense. Now, Mark Bayless is the guy whose friends or his son and nephew played with Bryan Kohberger or hung out with Bryan Kohberger in the woods there. And somebody was out there watching him, Mark, watching his ins and outs. They found candies in the wrappers and the tree line and stuff. And he was going in, breaking out. He ended up stealing $30,000 worth of a coin collection, drugs, knives, and many other things. And he's putting it all together that this is the guy who had been watching him, following him, and then breaking into his house. Effort, Pennsylvania, December 30. Poor Marianne. All Connie Saba can think of when she sees the news about Bryan and his poor parents. All the struggles with Bryan, the arguments that he and Michael used to have on the phone when Bryan was in her house hanging out with her son, Jeremy. And that's it, guys. That is it for this part. There is part 6. I think it's just part 6. I'm kind of go through it. That is left. It's only a few pages. So we're on page 359, 429. So I'll probably come back tomorrow and finish that up with you guys. But let's answer some questions. Throw some stars if you have questions for me. And in the meantime, in between time, I want to check on something on Google Earth that I promised I would. I thought it was a good book. Got me focused more on the victim's family and law enforcement, less on yeah, I agree. I will say that definitely is I think the book is good. It's written really well. There's some question marks I have about it. Like, it seems like it kind of goes at the G's a little bit, a little bit harsh in some places. But, outside of that, it does kind of focus in on the family members. It brings an insight onto what they were doing and how they were feeling throughout this entire process, and how they were also a victim to the system in certain ways because they wanted answers and they couldn't get any. Let's see. His parents enabled him. Yeah, I agree with that. Kohberger is just around all evil. I agree. ADT asked Steve G if he has a surveillance video showing a car that looks like Kohberger sitting in front of 1122 King Roads for 15 minutes. I'll ask him. I don't know if he does or not. Will you please finish since it's only a few more pages? No, tomorrow's going to be, it's about 60 something pages left. I haven't read them. So I like to read them first, highlight, and I mean, if you guys take a gander in here, you'll see nothing but underlining, and I don't know if I can do this here, but there's nothing but underline and highlights and stuff of what I read. Markings everywhere. This page is mostly marked. It's not showing up. Maybe the underlying parts. Well, I was highlighting so much, my highlighter ran out. No, you can't tell. But yeah, I've been highlighting and doing a bunch of things with it. But yeah, tomorrow I'll definitely finish it up. Tomorrow night we'll do it again. I can't remember your take on this. The letter from Montana to Montana letter. Do you think it's related to the classmate Montana or Montana the state? I've seen both. The way it's written in this book, it says letter to Montana. It sounds like it's a letter to that. I would assume, my guess is that it's referencing the person, the student that is. Am I sporting a new hat? I am, but I do think that is. Sorry, I got distracted there. I do think it's the Montana, the co-worker / student that he knew, and I wonder if that's the same person that maybe he was following. Do you think Ethan may have woke up and started kicking BK, and that's why his legs were cut up? No. So I guess now it really doesn't matter. I'm going to describe what I saw. I seen items that were in Ethan's room that I believe they were in Ethan's room at the time of the murder, and there's blood spatter on it that would indicate that the person that the blood spatter came off of was choking on spit it out. And so I don't think he got up and moved. I think it was a very swift, very quick. I think he hit I think they said in the book, the cardiac, I can't pronounce it, the artery, and just below the neck. And that's one of your main arteries. And you go out pretty quick. I have no idea why he attacked his legs or things of that nature. I would assume it had to do with some sort of hatred. Let's see, Dan, why do you? And I'm not going to ever show those pictures. They were sent to me in confidence, and these were items that were released by police. These weren't police evidence. I questioned why they weren't, to be honest with you. I was like, I don't understand why this isn't in evidence, but it's not. It was released to the families, and I actually had Steve from True Crime Web help me out with it. I informed who had sent it to me that because they asked me my opinion on the splatter, and they asked me my opinion on why these weren't in evidence, basically. And I couldn't answer them the second question. I thought it should have been, but I got with Steve, and he's the one that kind of broke down the type of splatter that it was. So, and I don't think that Ethan fought back at all, based on what I saw, and also blood down the back of the room. I believe that to be Ethan's, and in order for that to have occurred, one that I can't pronounce that artery that they hit. Obviously would have been the artery that could have caused that, and there was probably not a lot of movement for that to. It would have had to have been there concentrated for the blood to seep through and all the way out of the house. Why do you think he attacked Ethan when Ethan was deep asleep and didn't see him? Just hate physical presence of Ethan. I think so. Ethan was somebody that he wasn't. It sounds, according to the book, Bryan Kohberger was a virgin. Is a virgin. Maybe not anymore, but he was a virgin, and at least at the time of his arrest. And there's Ethan, a younger man with a girl who's spending the night with. He's probably seen him multiple times, because remember, the book indicates that Ethan was there constantly. He was there constantly, and so people indicated that they didn't know if he didn't live there. They even called him the honorary roommate in the picture that they took right before their last day there, and so he would have known. He would have seen him his in and outs. He probably hated him because he had things that Bryan Kohberger never would. Let's see. I think Ramsland should reassess her post notes on BK. Should reassess or release? Maybe I read that wrong. Release. Maybe. I hope so. I just don't know how much she's going to say about what he did at school, because I think she's bound based on him taking classes there. Daniel, do you think he may have withdrawn his plea? No. I think he wants to talk about this. I think he wants to correct the narrative, his narrative. All right, let's see. Wilson Short Hall. I'm going to look that up. I wanted to see where that is. Let's see where that is. Huh. All right. Just as I thought. All right. Let me make this bigger. So here is the Wilson Short Hall, Bryan Kohberger's office. And here's Nevada Street, where he disappears for about 9 minutes. Now, ain't going to take him 9 minutes to get there and drive back. I wonder if he had something hidden or something here at his office. So he drives up Nevada Street, and then he's seen coming back this direction at 444, and then he was like 449 or whatever, 447 when he comes back. I know at 54 is when he takes off. He takes off here at 54. So from 244 when he's traveling here, and then at 253, I think it's when they say they see him traveling this direction, and at 254 is when his phone goes off. Remember, because Ann Taylor was arguing like, oh, you can go so far in like 7-8 minutes or whatever when his phone turned off at 247. Because it didn't turn off until 254. They're like, oh yeah, there's a long ways you could travel. And I was like, not necessarily, because they had him on camera. They had him on Nevada Street up until 253. So yes, maybe because they thought his phone turned off, that doesn't mean that he was traveling at 247 from Nevada Street in an opposite direction and for 7 minutes. That's not the case. At 253, he's seen turning southbound at this intersection towards 270. Now, I don't think he turns down 270, which is the Pullman Highway. I think he goes down a little bit further. Let me close that. Goes down a little bit further, and then you see this red line, this red line here, this is a roadway that passes the 277 because they say that there's a camera here and they know Bryan Kohberger doesn't go this way. This was what Cy was going to also say, that he didn't go this way, which meant he couldn't be the white Elantra that's seen at the Floyd cannabis shop, right? But there's another route. If you continue from here, you continue downward. 254 is when his phone turns off. And then you turn off here at Sunshine Creek and you travel down this roadway all the way around. And you pop up, guess where? Back on 270. Guess what? Right before you get to Floyd's cannabis shop. Look at that. Just look at that. So there's a route. There's a route. And just kind of like this route, because remember, Antio was like, oh, there's no white Elantra that is leaving off of Highway 95 heading down south towards Blaine. Well, I had told you guys back when I brought this up when the gas station footage came out. Then all of a sudden, if you guys remember, once that gas station screenshot of the white Elantra came out, immediately after there was reports of law enforcement leaving Moscow and going to these different locations outside of Moscow, looking at different cameras from gas stations and things of that nature from outside of Moscow. And I said, hey, to me, this is an indication that they had no idea he left, and they probably didn't have any cameras of this person leaving this town. They gave us a border. Remember, there was a border between this street and that street and that street. I think it was Police River Drive, Highway 95, Taylor Avenue, and then all the way over here to the this area here. I can't remember what it's called. Well, I was like, there's a camera right here. There's a camera right here. In fact, this is where the boundary is, right here. There's this green mark. There's a camera here. Now, I didn't know at the time, and I'm sure Bryan Kohberger didn't know, that this camera doesn't record like that. It just takes pictures and stuff, and it wasn't saved. But Bryan Kohberger would have known that, and I felt like this was the path, and I didn't know that, so I assumed, this was my assumption. My assumption was, if they saw him leaving here and heading down this direction, they would have been at other towns way earlier than when that snapshot, that screen from, or that picture of the surveillance video came out from that gas station. They would have been out there way earlier had they known that he had gone out here. So I assumed that this one worked, and I assumed that they didn't see anything. So I came up with this route all the way around. And it just so happens it knocks you out over here back on 95 by Blaine, Idaho, which is where his phone ends up coming back, according to the PCA. Gets back on I-95 right when he is right next to Blaine. And that's when his phone comes back to the network. So, and there's cameras along I-95 here that didn't pick him up. And remember, Antio was like, oh, that screams exculpatory. And I'm like, but there's another route. I figured that route out before they even arrested him. I figured that route out when the gas station had that vehicle that was passing by. Now, I could have done my psychic thing and said, I could have done the psychic thing and been like, oh, I think this is the route that he took. And a lot of people would have been, I hope, impressed. But it's no psychic power. It's just taking the information that we had and then watching the actions of law enforcement, and those actions telling me what they had and what they didn't have and what the most likely outcome was, which was that they didn't have any footage of that vehicle leaving that neighborhood. And obviously they couldn't find it, which is why they were asking also for cameras. But once they got a video of that vehicle on a highway that is leading out of town, that they were like, okay, maybe this guy did leave or did come back from somewhere else. Until he had to get out of town, they didn't have videos of him getting out of town. So we have to find an avenue of a route that gets out of town without any cameras. And this is it. I hope all that makes sense. I hope I'm not losing anybody. I give permission to read my appeal explanation if necessary. All right. Thank you. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Chloe is our honorary lawyer here. because I did ask her this. Oh gosh. Okay, so there is no appeal thing. I'm not going to read the second part. Out of an abundance of caution, Hitler will do a detailed and thorough review of every document before unsealing. This is likely will not begin until after sentencing and may take weeks or months. He is also inclined to not release anything until the appeal period, which is afforded to every criminal defendant and exists for everyone despite existence of a plea agreement. According to SCOTUS, part of Kohberger's deal waived all appeals, which leaves the remaining option for appeal routes to be slim to none. Even so, Hitler will not release things until the appeal period is over, which I believe in this case is 42 days. So there you go. I barely understand it, guys. I'm not going to lie. I'd be lying if I said differently. Let's see. Daniel Carr OTID. I'm not sure what that means. Imagine the Joy Bryan experience when he saw the photo of Ethan's. Oh, yeah. That's probably. Yeah. Let's see. Hold on. Maybe told the Chapins Ethan was stabbed in the buttocks, and I think that we know he was laying on his side in the bed. He may not even have been awake. I don't think he was awake. All indications are he was asleep. Which, if Xana's life was taken in this pretty much in the same room as he was in, and he was drinking that night, there's video of him being at Xana Kernodle. It looks like he's having a really good time. Apparently Dylan and Bethany were very drunk. Bethany slept through everything. She woke up when Dylan called her multiple times. This should tell you how quiet this was and how why maybe it's possible that Dylan was unsure of herself. I don't think he was hitting the heart either. It says here the core I can't pronounce the dang word. There's some words I just can't pronounce, guys. I know what it is, but I can't pronounce it. I was shocked at how much the coroner told the families. Do you think that's normal? I think it is. I mean, she's human. You have families who are starving for answers. You have some answers. It must be incredibly hard and sad I know it's incredibly hard and sad to be in those situations. I've stood in front of a victim who lost a loved one due to somebody else, taking their life. I've been to those calls, and it is one of the hardest things to do. It's the questions are all the same. Why did this happen? Why him? Why her? What are you going to do? It's always the same. Right. And it's so hard. And there's so many other questions that come along with it, but the court questions are the same, and it doesn't get easier. And for a location that probably doesn't have this happen very often, she's human. I can understand and respect why she did it. It sounds like the black car was there all along. Do you agree? Black car. I'm not familiar with the black car. You're talking about one of the ones that were parked up front? Probably. The spot where he parked after being pulled over by the female WSU cop is the opposite side of the Northeast Stadium Way across from the Wilson Short Hall. There you go. There you go. How do you know with such certainty that BK never lost his V card? I didn't say that. I said that's what the book said. I don't know if that's true, but that's what the book says. So I don't know. I don't know how they know that, but I even said that when I read that, I was like, man, that's a bold statement to say that he's still has the V card. I don't know. I don't know how they know that. I guess nobody's come forward to say that they have. I don't know. Dan, are you going to get us the body cam the night he was pulled over? wonder what's on ANT they didn't want us to see. That's the goal. That's the goal. Me and the team have already submitted our Freedom of Information Acts and trying to get those things. Policies question. Which one was that one? Hopefully I didn't miss it. Oh yeah. The one I just answered. Yes. That's my goal. I'm trying to get that going. Thank you, Low 12. Appreciate that. We have Desert Sunset with 149. We have DD Fuentes coming in with 1 and 2 Drunk Turkey Show memberships, and Low 12 being a newest member. Thank you guys. At the end of the podcast, I'll be putting in the link for it's that's the wrong one. My bad, Chloe. All right, let me read that one too. All right. Garza signed a plea agreement for 2 charges. Agreement includes a waiver of appeals. Garza asked the trial counsel repeatedly to file notice of appeal. Notice of appeal just puts people on notice that you are going to appeal a decision. It's not necessarily the arguments. Trial counsel tells Garza that this will be problematic because of his waiver and never files notice of appeal. 4 months later, outside of the window of appeal, notice can be filed. Garza files for post-conviction relief based on his trial counsel being ineffective for not filing the notice of appeal. The trial court dismissed the petition, and the appellate court affirmed the dismissal. The Idaho Supreme Court split from most federal circuits and held that where there is an appeal waiver, there is not an automatic presumption of prejudice when counsel fails to file notice of appeal. The Idaho Supreme Court said the defendant still had the burden to show deficient performance of the attorney, and that prejudice resulted from that deficiency's performances. SCOTUS decided to take up the case and decided whether a criminal defendant attorney is presumptively not placing the burden of proof on the defendant, ineffective where they decline to file notice of appeal where there is an appeal waiver. Conclusion: yes, it is presumptively effective. Why? Plea agreements are essentially contracts. Though many appeals are foreclosed on where there is a plea waiver, obviously there could be a potential issue and appeals that fall outside of the scope of the agreement, such as ineffective counsel, voluntariness of plea, etc. So essentially that case means that now, even when a waiver of appeals is included with a plea agreement, technically there are possible appeals that could exist that fall outside of the scope of the plea agreement. Thus, every criminal defendant is entitled to appeals regardless of waiver. But here's the thing, like, appeals are so hard to get approved or go through. In this scenario here where he's waived them and those things, I find it very unlikely he'll ever succeed in those things. And I think that in time, he is going to do some sort of interview, whether it's with his former professor, news media, whoever. He's going to do that. I have no doubt in my mind. That's my opinion. But I have no doubt in my mind that that's going to eventually happen. And so, if he's going through the appeal process and all these other things, it's not something that you necessarily can or want to do if you're claiming you're innocent. You know what I'm saying? And if his goal or his scheme or whatever is that he's going to appeal and win under some sort of weird appeal, I think he has a better chance of just going to court and trying to fight his case in trial. And then if he loses, still appeal. I mean, he'll have his appeals to do those things. Going the route of pleading out and saying that you're going to waive most of your appeals, apparently you still have some, isn't an effective route, right? That it's not like, oh, I have this master plan and I think this is going to work. I think it's more so, I don't think it's going to happen. I just doubt it. Gotcha. But let me know if I got that right, if I said that right. DD driver has a dash cam? I have no idea. I read it. Let's see. Canterbury it was in Alfred. Oh, never mind. Foil that 10 times. There you go. And we're going to continue to get that foil until we get that in our little greasy hand, so to speak. Let's see if I have anything else. Put a couple of stars, guys. Miss 101 says, do you think BK had a radio through school? Do you know if Idaho has encryption on the radios? Most areas have encryption for major incidents. Now for officer safety and protecting info. I heard that the Moscow radio, up until shortly after the murders, was broadcasting their 911 stuff on Broadcastify, something like that, and then they stopped shortly after this. I think it's possible, that he was listening in there. I think that was one of the reasons why he turned on his phone, and so I would have assumed that it was probably more so a phone than a radio, but that's possible. To me, I felt that he drove back to Idaho at 9:12 in the morning because he couldn't search murders in Moscow, right? Because then that's having knowledge beforehand. And even if it's not in the news, doesn't mean that the scene wasn't found, right? This just means that the news hasn't gotten there. Moscow's a little town, so major news media would take a little bit before they get there. I think they're coming in from Lewiston, which is about 45 minutes away. So major media and those type of things, even local media, probably isn't going to hit the board right immediately when the bodies are discovered or when law enforcement is going to be called in. In this scenario, it took a few minutes because media in Moscow and Pullman had radio scanners. So apparently those things are available to people that are not law enforcement who are listening to the scanners. That was in the book. So to me, I felt that for Bryan Kohberger to feel so confident in going back at 9:12, knowing that those bodies could have been discovered at any point. I mean, the bodies could have been discovered at 9 o'clock while he's en route there, and then a perimeter being set up and dash cam footage being circulated and recorded, that they're going to go back and look to see if, the white Elantra is passing by while they're there. Because one of the tall tale signs of somebody that's committed a crime is they usually return back to the crime scene. Curiosity kills the cat, so to speak, and they can't help themselves in most cases. In this case, it seems that Bryan Kohberger, at least without his phone on, only went back that one time. With his phone on, only went back one time. There's still the possibility he went back other times, but his phone was off. But, even the book says that they believe that the last time that he was there was that morning at 9 o'clock. So he's taking a risk by driving out there at that time. And so I thought to myself, it's a less of a risk if he knows by listening to the police scanners that they haven't been found yet. Maybe that's why he felt so confident to go back. He didn't go back any other time. The urge to go back must have been there. The urge to go and drive by must have been there, just like it was, at 9 o'clock in the morning. But what gave him the confidence to go back? Was it just the fact that he didn't see anything in the news? Or was it because he felt that maybe because he knew that the cops hadn't found it yet? So I don't know if we'll ever find the answer to that. I hope we do. Did Xana go upstairs? Is that how he noticed her? It sounds like she went partially up the stairs. Dylan says she heard who she thought was Xana go up and down the stairs. I mean, who she thought was Kaylee with Murphy go up and down the stairs and saying somebody's here. So I'm going to assume that a little bit, yeah. Yeah, just remember, he can try all he wants, but because the law says he must be able to try, regardless, he gave up most appeals. Yeah. Yeah, it's a long shot. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Dan, do you know when I listen to Steve, he sounds so frustrated and sad, but sometimes he confused me. Does he think there was more involved in the crimes? No, I don't think he thinks there's more involved in the crimes. I think what he thinks is, or what he wants out there is, they have uncovered more information about Bryan Kohberger, and they want those things out there. They want everybody to know the kind of dirtbag and piece of crap Bryan Kohberger is, and that there is no doubt. They don't like these people that are talking, saying, oh man, we think he's innocent, this, that, and the third. If he had to go out and say, hey, this is where the knife is, this is where the kill kit is, you'll find it here, you'll find it there, and those things get found, or whatever the case may be, there is absolutely zero doubt in anybody's mind anymore, unless you're just trying to be stupid. That would tell you that he obviously did it. He would have then information that only the killer would have, and currently only the killer would have. And so that's why he wants those things out. He doesn't, I don't think anybody would want their child's murderer to be seen as anything other than a villain. And in this scenario, there's a lot of weird people out there that look up to him. They see themselves in him. They look and act like him. Loners and stuff like that. So Bryan was curious, no police activity, no news. Well, how would he know about the police activity? That's the problem, right? How would he know there was no police activity? Unless he had something that was listening into it. What? He listens to Britney Spears and rap? No way he's an Odinist. That's funny. You're welcome. You're welcome. All righty, guys. Well, that's going to do it for me today. I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll finish this book out. We got one more part to do, part 6. I haven't read it, so I don't know what's going to come out yet. I'm going to read it probably tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. But we'll be back on tomorrow, probably around the same time, 6:30 p.m. Central. That's 7:30 p.m. on the East Coast. That's 4:30 on the West Coast. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for joining. For those that supported the channel with super chats and gifted memberships, thank you guys. Mods, members, thank you guys. You guys are amazing. You guys are the reasons why we keep going and we keep going strong. Until next time, guys, I'll see y'all later. Peace out.